Hey everyone, Tactics here with another first look at a brand new Dragonflight dungeon on the alpha, this time covering NELTHARUS. As a reminder, this is going to be the dungeon on heroic difficulty because that's all that's currently available outside of normal, currently on the alpha, and basically I'm just going to go through it, kind of give my first thoughts on the dungeon itself, little bit of basic info, an overview of like trash and bosses, nothing too specific. More in-depth guides will be coming, of course, much later, closer to the release when we have all those mythic abilities. But for now, I'm just going to kind of give my thoughts on it. I'll be doing this for every single dungeon that releases as they release them. Hopefully, maybe some new stuff later on this week as well. But if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more alpha content. And let's just start off talking a little bit about the dungeon kind of design and layout itself. So right off the top here, you have a couple choices on where you want to go. If you come in through the entrance and you turn right, there's going to be two bosses in the right half of the dungeon. There's a single boss in the left half of the dungeon, and then the final boss is actually kind of in the middle, initially behind a wall that opens up once you've killed the other bosses. So you do have a little bit of choice here of how you want to start out. Already, that off the bat, I'm much happier with this layout compared to Alderman, which I talked about previously. A lot more choice in terms of how you start a dungeon, the order of the bosses, which can be very relevant, especially when talking about like tyrannical keys where you want to commit your bloodlust. Maybe the trash mobs, which mobs are more dangerous and you want to commit a bloodlust to, that kind of thing. So I like the extra choice that this dungeon has, and honestly the vibes of the dungeon, like the magma flowing everywhere, it's really cool looking. I'm a big fan of this dungeon. Kind of similar to Alderman, there is no actual checkpoint in this dungeon. You will always spawn right at the entrance. It's less of a problem because the dungeon is much less sprawling and long than Alderman is. Like I said, it splits off right away into a right wing and a left wing, and the main boss is like right there in the center. So it's less of a problem, but still definitely like I would like to see dungeons with significantly more checkpoints because you're already punished, kind of, especially when talking about Mythic Plus in particular. You are already punished by having a 5-second penalty. Do you really need to be punished by having an insanely long run back as well? I don't really think so. And so, I mean, I'd be happy with either removing the 5-second death penalty or removing some of the really far run backs and giving you more checkpoints. But that's just my thoughts on it. Talking about kind of trash mobs, again, comparing a little bit to Alderman, and I already have a video on Alderman if you want to check that out. There's a lot more random damage from these trash packs, so maybe potentially a little bit more dangerous to pull multiple packs together. But on that note, it is much easier to get multiple packs together because of the layout of the dungeon and the trash packs. They're still like relatively small individual packs, but the density of these packs is much higher. So it's much more easy for you to kind of pull multiple groups together than something like Alderman, which is good. There's also high potential for skipping a lot of trash without using things like Shroud or Invispods. Like there are paths where you can skip a huge number of trash packs if you just kind of hug a wall through certain halls in the area. So I think that's really good. You're gonna have a lot of choice. There's a ton of trash in this dungeon, though, I will say. So in all likelihood, you're gonna be skipping quite a bit of trash. So you're gonna have a decent amount of choice in terms of what you're actually killing and what you choose to avoid. The other kind of relevant thing in this dungeon is there are a ton of paths. And also actually quite a few mini boss mobs, kind of similar to the Theater of Pain mobs. My guess is those are probably going to be skipped very often. There's not many that you have to kind of pull. A lot of them are just kind of, you can kind of figure out a path around them, even if they have true sight, which I'm actually 100% sure that they do. But they are at least in the dungeon itself, so you have to be aware of them for sure. Talking about bosses, so let's talk about the right side first. So initially you go into the right side of the dungeon. Again, you have the choice left or right, but if you go to the right, that's the side with two bosses. You will have to do Chargath first. Once you kill Chargath, it'll open up the door towards the next boss, but Chargath himself, basically quite straightforward on heroic difficulty. He'll throw a spear at a random target, leaves a little puddle around where the spear lands, and chains the target to the spear. And basically how you get rid of that chain is by running it through the boss, and that will stun the boss. I believe it also puts a damage amp on him, and it will stop him from casting his big party AoE damage ability, which is very important, because if he gets many or maybe even any ticks on higher tyrannical of that off, it is going to be a ton of damage. So you really want to make sure you're interrupting that or preventing him from casting that in general. Fun fact though, these chains that he spawns on players, there are actually interactable nodes of these chains in this half of the wing as well. So the right half of the dungeon before Chargath himself, there are these one-time use chain nodes where you can interact with this chain, run it through a mob, and it does 10 yards splash, fire damage, and slow. So a little bit of extra help for pulling those trash mobs there before this area, and kind of, gets you familiar with the boss mechanic, which is kind of cool. Back to Chargath though, doesn't really do much else right now aside from a frontal line of magma attack. I believe that's targeted at the tank, but of course, everyone will want to be careful for it. He just kind of alternates, and he gets stunned quite a fair bit because of the spears, and he just doesn't really do much right now outside of, getting stunned, assuming you do the fight correctly. So definitely expect him to gain something on Mythic difficulty that makes him a little bit more challenging. Like I said though, once you defeat Chargath, a new path will open up, and you'll be able to move upstairs to Forge Master Gorek, who definitely gives a bunch of Painsmith vibes. He, of course, slamming on that anvil when you find him, and that is the same sound effect Painsmith does, so a little spooky. Basically, whenever he slams that anvil, it'll do party damage. It'll also do an axe throw at a random player that shoots out a cross pattern of fire swirlies from their location. You don't actually need to avoid this if you're the targeted player. You can actually just kind of stand still and chill out, and it won't actually hit you. Very similar to the Painsmith tank weapon attack, actually. In terms of the actual tank attack that this boss has, it's a knockback, and then the boss will jump and try and smash where he knocked the tank to, which that smash is actually fully avoidable, and you will want to avoid that because it does hurt. It will truck. And the only other thing he does right now is he will hit the forge at the front of the room, and it'll summon just a bunch of swirlies over a few seconds at player locations that you'll just want to dodge. Overall, definitely a fan of this boss. Thought he was super fun. Moving into the left side of the dungeon, there's just a single boss upstairs here, and that is Magma Tusk. Big old lava mammoth, and I believe there's also a mount model that you can get for this guy as well. And basically, few very simple abilities. This is a kind of going to be a DPS race boss fight because he will basically do a AoE party hit and then give himself a stacking buff to his lava cone damage, and basically the lava cone will just target a random player. That player cannot avoid it, but everyone else can, and it follows that player. So that damage is going to ramp up. But luckily, Blizzard did have foresight in the situation and capped the number of stacks that damage buff can go up to at 3. So on a tyrannical boss fight, you're not going to get to like 10, 15 stacks of this damage buff and just have it be a one-shot every time. So really, really glad that foresight is coming in here. They're capping that to potentially deal with any issues that could arise from having this boss fight be very extended. So very good to see. Outside of the lava cone and the party hit, he just charges at a random target. Just kind of want to aim that into a nearby wall to prevent a ton of boss movement. But that's really it. Very straightforward fight here. Again, potentially missing an entire mechanic, but this is heroic, so that makes sense. But just kind of a big DPS/HPS check, tank and spank boss fight in this dungeon, which, there's got to be a couple of those. There's nothing wrong with those. And then you move down into the final boss of the dungeon, which is Warlord Sarga. And again, she's in the middle of the dungeon, actually, and that door will open up once you've defeated the other bosses. And she has a fire frontal of her own. This one is avoidable by everyone, though. It does not follow the target, so you can just kind of run out of it. She also summons an ad that'll fixate a random player. On Heroic, these were fully CCable, and so they weren't really a mechanic at all. I expect them to probably be CC immune on Mythic if I had to guess, but we'll see how that ends up playing out. There's also a debuff, which is a little weird and completely irrelevant on Heroic, so I'm guessing maybe it becomes more relevant on Mythic, but for now, it didn't really do anything. And the only other thing she really does is she will put a giant shield on herself, and treasure piles around the room will become interactable. You can interact with it, and you either get like an AoE bomb or a single target wand, and those do extra damage to her absorb shield. So you just kind of run around, get those items, break her absorb shield, and then continue on with the fight from there. Overall, I definitely like this dungeon a lot more than Alderman at a first glance. specifically related to the dungeon design itself, the layout of the dungeon, and the kind of placement and density of trash mobs, right? You have a lot of choice you can make here, even without things like Shroud and Invis pots. There's going to be a lot of things you're able to skip without committing those kinds of things, which gives you a lot of interesting choices, I think. There is spaces for LOS, big LOS pulls. There's spaces for, just grouping things together. There's those chains that I mentioned earlier that can help maybe enable some larger pulls. So I think this is going to be a much more interesting dungeon than something like Alderman, and it's something I'm definitely excited for. But let me know what you guys think. What do you guys think about NELTHARUS? What do you guys think about Alderman? Of course, I covered that in my previous video, so if you haven't seen that, make sure you check it out. But would love to know what you guys think. As more dungeons become available on the alpha, of course, I will be putting out more and more videos giving you all my thoughts on it. So make sure you guys like and subscribe to the channel to not miss one. You can also check me out on my Twitch channel at Tactics, where I stream all that stuff, mythic rating, high keys, and of course alpha content. As always though, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.